Okay, another pinball video. Slightly different. I'm gonna actually ask a question. How do you set up a pinball arcade? Now, I'm not talking about, getting a space and getting a whole bunch of machines and then putting all the machines in and plugging them in and then people pay to play those machines. I'm talking about how do you lay out the machines? I've been to a couple of arcades in the past with a collection of both older and newer pinball machines. Seattle Pinball Museum is one that comes to mind. It's a great place. They have a collection of really cool machines there. And if you're in the Seattle area, I definitely urge you to go and check it out. But what they've done is that they have machines on the ground floor and then they have a loft. And the ground floor, they've got their machines laid out chronologically. So on one side of the room, they have all their EM machines. And as you go down the row of EMs, they get newer and newer. You cross to the other side of the room and you get into your solid state machines. And as you move down the line, they get newer and newer. That's how it was when I was there last. And it looks like that's kind of how they've got it set up now. Some other arcades, they sort of isolate their EM machines off into one place in the building. So when I was in Toronto, I went to the Pint Public House, which is just under the CN Tower. There's a bunch of machines there, and they had all of their EM machines were kind of isolated off into one section. And then in the other area, they had all of the newer pinball machines. So is that the best way to go? I know that there are machines that attract multiplayer. Especially there's some that came out in the 80s and early 90s where you can kind of steal the previous player's work. So Hollywood Heat is one of those ones where there's a couple places to lock a ball. So the player in front of you could lock those balls, drain, and then you can jump in and you can steal their work. Strange Science is another one where you're stacking a whole pile of balls up for a multi-ball play. Those are awesome for multiplayer games. And whenever I've had machines like that set up, that's what tends to happen on those. So it makes sense for machines like that to go kind of on ends of rows where people can congregate. But then I have other machines like Lethal Weapon 3 that if you get a handful of good players on that machine, let's say you have 4 good players on Lethal Weapon 3, you start first, it could be 25 minutes before you're back on that machine because the ball times go for so long. What are you doing? You're just sort of standing around, you're watching them play, but it's in a row, so there's only so much room that you can get in and kind of see what's going on. So commonly what happens is that the other players, after a certain amount of time, they kind of drift off to the side or whatever. They start kind of looking around or talking amongst themselves. Now, I like the idea of having a row of EM machines. Aesthetically, it looks great. You have a bunch of wedge heads all together. People who are into those style of games, they go and they kind of congregate in that area. I have a handful of wide bodies, and I think it would be hilarious to just have a row of, 4 or 5, 6 wide bodies all kind of lined up there just because they're so big. But I don't know if that's the best way to go, because if you have a game like Lethal Weapon and you put on either side of it, let's say you put a single player EM machine. Now someone who's waiting 25 minutes to play their next ball, they can go right next door to the EM machine and play and see what's going on next door and still play their game. But is that going to look too sort of random? Is you get a bunch of machines, you have a whole row of machines, and the ages and style of machines are kind of random and all over the place, and it doesn't look like it makes much sense. So I thought, okay, well, that's a way to go, but let's try to make them look not so random. So you line up maybe 3 mid-80s machines, and then next to that you have 3 EM machines, and then next to that you have some 90s machines. So they're kind of in blocks. Would that be okay? It's just kind of questions on what would people prefer? Now, a lot of people that are going to go into the arcade are not going to be pinball people. I think the majority of people who are going to be coming in are going to be people that are like, oh yeah, I know of pinball, I've played pinball, I like pinball, I've just never played a lot of it. And they're going to come in, and so the arrangement might not be as big a deal for them because they're exploring all of the different titles. Now, a pinball person who is you know, a technical pinhead, they're gonna usually have a style of game that they prefer. Maybe they just like the newer types of pinball, or they really are attracted to some of the 90s machines or something like that, right? Those people may never go over to the EM section if I have them isolated out. And I know I was one of those people where I was really only interested in the solid state machines. I really didn't give the EMs much of a look at all. I just kind of walked by, it's like, oh yeah, EMs, but it was a different kind of gameplay and it wasn't what I was looking for or whatever. And then one day I was waiting for someone to finish playing their ball, and I migrated over to an EM machine that was kind of across the way, and I was checking it out and I was like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. I played that one, then I played another one, and then I sort of got into the swing of EM. The gameplay is different, the objectives are different, it's a different kind of mindset and flow, and the ball's a little more floaty on the play field. It's not so crazy, it's not like a 13 ball multiplay in Apollo 13 or anything, you know, it's a different kind of thing, and I got to appreciate that a little bit more. With that in mind, does it make sense then to put EM machines next to solid state machines? So someone who is really only interested in solid state machines, now they're waiting for their turn or whatever, and they're looking at these EM machines and doing what I did. It's like, oh, this looks kind of interesting, I'm gonna have to try this one next. Is that gonna attract them over to the EM machines a little bit more? Another thought is that if you have all your EM machines in a particular part of the building, they're all maybe in the back corner or something, and then you have all your newer machines in the front corner, you get a bunch of people in to play, and they might only be interested in the solid state machines. Now you've got everybody on one side of the building, and if there's a flood, then the building's gonna list one way because everybody's over there. But if they're scattered around, then everybody would be scattered around, and when the flood comes, it would be nice and even. That theory only works if there's a flood and your building floats. But you know what I mean, is that if the machines are more distributed out, then the people playing would be more distributed out and not just all in one side of the building. So I'm asking you, who is probably going to be the pinball player, would you think that that was too weird? Would you think that that would look too kind of ramshackle and kind of frumpy to have a mixture of machines? Or would you prefer to see the row of EMs, the row of 80s, the row of Y bodies? Or do you not care? Do you not think it makes any difference? I want people to get into the machines. I want them to come in. I want them to check them out and to play machines that they normally wouldn't play. Since it's going to be on the free play method, it doesn't cost them any extra to try the EM machine or to try this other crazy machine that I've got. So it's not a money thing, it's just a desire thing. How do you entice them to play some of these older machines, I guess, is part of the question. So I thought I'd make a video. I thought I would ask you, what are your thoughts on it? Because I'm split on doing them chronologically or doing them broken out into chunks, chronological chunks, I guess. A bunch of machines of one date, and then next to that a bunch of machines of another date, and they're all kind of broken up. I think there's benefits and hazards of both. Yeah, so what do you think? Leave some comments in the comments and make some comments, and I'll read your comments and make some other comments. And until then, I've got a couple videos actually underway right now, so we should see those pretty soon. And I don't have any new news on the arcade. but it's close. It's really close, but I don't want to say anything. So if you want to know about the arcade, like and subscribe and do all of that other business. We're also beefing up our social media platform because social media is a thing and people use it. So we've got the Twitter accounts and we've got the Instagram accounts, and I'll leave links below to those. If you use those platforms, please follow along on those platforms, and you'll get news from there as well. Okay, so I think that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.